Hi, and welcome back to the Virtual Coach Advantage podcast. I'm Emma Calvert, founder and coach at Springboard Future, and today I'm going to be talking to my co-founder and our master coach, Neela Bettridge, about one of my favourite topics, empowerment. Hi, Neela.
Hi, Emma. Really excited to do this podcast with you today.
So I'm going to tell you why this is one of my favourite topics, Neela, empowerment, because I feel like in organisations, we talk about this all the time. It's a word that gets bandied around all the time. We need to empower our teams. Our teams need to be more empowered. It's going to impact our performance and our bottom line if we're an empowered culture. I don't actually think most of the time people really understand what that means. So, can we just start off by getting really clear? What are we talking about when we're talking about empowerment?
From what I understand empowerment to be, and when I see it working extremely well, is when people are trusted to get on with their work and they are trusted to be accountable and responsible. Now, this requires courageous leaders, leaders who have clear vision, but it also requires the people who are trusted to have great clarity in terms of their roles, responsibilities, and accountability. So, if you like, you see proper empowerment when both of those parts of the jigsaw are in place.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about those two parts because not only from my own personal experience of being managed, but also going into organisations and seeing this all the time. I see quite a lot of organisations or managers or leaders saying, yeah, I empower my people. But that roles and responsibility piece, that like clarity, they might sort of say, oh, go off and do X, Y, Z. You're empowered to do it. But actually, some of the time, the people are sat there going, I'm not really sure what they've just asked me to do.
Yes, exactly. And that is actually the problem. And if you don't have in the culture a speak up culture where people feel courageous enough to say, actually, I really don't understand. Could you repeat that to me? Then actually, that's where accountability and empowerment go completely, they do not work. So it's a really, there's a real journey, if you like, in terms of speak up culture, allowing people to take risks, allowing people to say what they need to, obviously respectfully, and actually the ability of people to be accountable, to take ownership. And I think those two ingredients need to happen together.
And actually, what you're talking about there, Neela, is something that we in our work like to call psychological safety. You're
That's right.
exactly describing an environment where people feel safe and trusted, aren't you?
Exactly. And as you know, psychological safety has a number of facets to it. You know, the ability to fail, the ability to take risks, the ability to challenge. And that enables individual leaders and individuals within organizations and teams actually to go further. Now, I'm not talking about taking risks and speaking up in inappropriate ways. What predicates all of this is respect for yourself, respect for the other. But, while that is in place, then you end up with a speak up culture, one that really works.
So, what's your advice, Neela? I'm a manager or I'm a leader. The first thing I think we're saying, if we want an empowered culture, is it's got to be a safe and trusted culture. So, what are your top tips for creating that psychological safety within teams and organisations?
Yeah, great question, Emma. I think there's a couple of things that you need to notice, first of all. If you are a leader and you're going into your team meetings and nobody's speaking, if you ask for a point of view, everybody keeps quiet. If you find that you're always the one talking, then you are probably leading a team that is not psychologically safe. And then if I was working with that sort of leader, I would be saying to them, how can you enable people to speak? How can you keep your point of view out of the picture? How can you create safe spaces where people are able to say what they think? and that they think that they feel that they can say things without retaliation or any kind of retribution from either you or the system. If you feel that you cannot do that, you are not creating a psychologically safe environment. So this is about real self-awareness on the leader's part, but also changing some of the behaviors that they may have up to that point had within meetings, within individual meetings. Do they have a relationship of respect with each other? Is it a parent-child relationship, or is it an adult-to-adult relationship? All of these things actually affect psychological safety. So these are a few of the tips that I would be getting people to think about if they were actually, to date, maybe not leading psychologically safe environments.
And I wonder, Neela, and I am literally like wondering out loud now, and I will promise listeners come back to empowerment, but this is the foundation of it. I'm wondering whether some of our up and coming leaders and our up and coming managers like actually really do need to learn this themselves, because if you think, certainly if I think back to the environments I worked in kind of organizations when I was first heading out in my career, the dominance culture, the dominance leader, the leader tells you how to do it, you don't challenge it, the leader is always right, the leader's wearing almost a superhero cape, right, because they are everything to everyone. That is different, because that's not what we're asking leaders to do now, is it? We're asking them to behave differently. And actually, if you've grown up in an environment, a dominance environment, you're going to have to teach that yourself, right?
Exactly, and actually get very self-aware. And I'd like to add some nuance to that, actually, Emma, if I may. There are times where a directional leader is required, depending on what the organization or the
Okay.
group is going through. I think, but actually, this is about a behavior and a value set of how you generally hold your leadership. So, actually, sometimes you may need to be more directional than other times. However, if you want to create a leadership team that accept that on occasion, because they know that generally they are in very psychologically safe environments where they can voice their opinion, where it can be heard appropriately. So there's a balance with that. And I think you're right. Leaders have to unpick their behavior on always leading from the front, of always having the last word, of always having the answer, because that may not always be true.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of this actually is quite interesting. For the last couple of years, we've had a real push on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this kind of behaviors, of course, feed into cultures that have DE and I at their core. They're very interesting because they're about inclusive leadership. Um, and actually, that really is at the core of everything that we're seeking to do in that space. And that truly empowers organizations.
So, as a leader, we've created that psychological safety. It's an inclusive environment. You did talk a little bit there about the direction and when you need to turn it on, but there is, I particularly find with some sort of like maybe our team leader level people that we coach, or our sort of new to management coaches, sometimes they struggle with that line between empowerment and actually adding more workload or more stress to the people that they're managing.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Um, and that is actually really one of the big problems that's happened across this COVID period as well, because you can empower people, but because of the stress that's been coming down through organizations, through the levels, you can have empowered people who actually feel completely and utterly overwhelmed. And we've seen a lot of that, haven't we, within our work. So,
Yeah.
how do you as a leader empower whilst understanding what you're asking of your people? And that requires you as a leader to really have quite a firm hold on volume, on what you're asking, how you're asking it, whilst empowering. It's a very fine line to walk.
Yeah, and that can be difficult if we are still working in a remote environment, to have maybe sometimes even have a difficult conversation if that's what is needed.
Exactly. And I welcome the return to hybrid working because I think you need to have that interaction to be able to get that balance right. And online does really get in the way of that, and of true empowerment. Because if empowerment is true, you truly feel able to do your job. But if you're overwhelmed, how can you possibly feel able to do your job?
Yeah, I mean, I might just take us down this rabbit hole of like, the COVID, working from home, hybrid working. And I think I might have a controversial question to ask you, but it is something we're all talking about. So, recently in the press, a financial services CEO, won't name them, has come out and said no one's doing any work at home. And that is then back to the control versus empowerment. Obviously, I don't know what the reality in their organisation is about, but I've also been seeing lots of articles popping up, lots of conversation popping up about the role of the manager that actually most of us have experienced during, kind of working from home, that actually people have just gotten on and they've done their jobs and they've done it very well. In fact, some industries talk about performance being even greater and therefore questioning, do we actually need a manager? So we've got these polar opposite views, like one CEO saying, no one is working, you must come back to the office so I can see what you're doing and I can see you're putting your hours in. And then this other kind of group of people going, actually, I don't think we need managers anymore because people were just empowered and they cracked on and they did what they did. It's a fascinating debate.
It is a fascinating debate, and I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. That I think there's always going to be a need for managers to lead, but maybe the way of leadership, empowered leadership, how do you do that at a distance, needs to be rethought. And actually, the descriptor of that financial services company, you can see there's very low trust, isn't there, in that environment. So it is very likely if you go into that environment, I'm not saying it's the truth, I don't know enough about that case study or the organization involved, but it could be that you'll find that there is a lack of psychological safety in that area, and there will therefore be a lack of empowerment. So it's an interesting conundrum, and I think it's going to be rumbling on for quite some time, that debate.
So if we kind of like, take the liberty of extrapolating this forward, are we saying the role of the manager's changed? Like what we look to our managers for has and is changing.
Yes, definitely. And I think you're seeing this very much happening within the growth and tech industries, where the way people within those organizations want to be led has changed. We've got a different generation coming through. They see and view leadership in a very different way to previous generations. It doesn't mean that there is no room for leadership, there's always going to be room for leadership, but they very much see leadership needing to be inclusive. They want their voices heard. They feel they have a contribution to make. So it'll be interesting how this plays out, actually, the empowered leader, um, over the next couple of years as the previous generations of leaders phase out and you get this new generation coming in. But of course, we have always, and ever will it thus be, have these autocratic leaders. Always, they will be there. But actually, if you really want to empower your people and you're working in global environments, which most of the organizations we work with are, very, very difficult. You are going to have to rethink how you do your leadership because you're not sitting behind somebody's shoulders actually watching what they're doing in their work. So you're going to have to trust them at some point.
I love that phrase. I don't know if you've coined it, Neela, but we should definitely, if you haven't, empowered leadership, right? Because it is, when we do talk about, it's not just what we've been through with COVID, and the hybrid working now. It is also about what people are looking for in work. these days. And I would argue, when I first started work 20 years ago, I wanted to get a job, right? I just wanted to get a job. But actually, from my generation, and I definitely see it in the generations below me, is actually it's purpose, isn't it? And we've done, anyone wants to go back and check out our season 1 podcast, we've got a whole podcast on purpose. But actually, that's what the empowered leader is there to do, right? The empowered leader is there now to set the purpose, to set the vision that people can connect to and help people know how they're contributing to it, but not to be over their shoulder making sure they are doing it.
Yes, and I think that's lovely, actually, what you've said, Emma. And I'd like to take that a little bit further because I just noticed I was having a vision come up in my mind as you were speaking that. So they are purpose led, these empowered leaders. But what I think they also do really well is if you imagine creating a safe space with a boundary, they enable people through clarity of boundary and role and purpose to be able to navigate their jobs within that. Will they do it exactly as the leader? No, they won't. But they will be within the boundaries. They will understand the need to report back. So I think that's how the roles change, where if you imagine the role of the leader is to hold the boundary and create direction of travel.
Yeah. And then I think what we would say is if you can do all those things, I mean, it sounds like a lot, but if you can do all of those things, then you are going to have high performing people. You're going to have high performing teams. We know that empowered employees are loyal employees. They won't go looking for opportunities elsewhere because they like the environment you've created. We see that all the time, don't we, Neela?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why would you? Treat people like human beings, treat them with respect, have open conversations. And that is, and being an empowered leader and creating empowerment is not the same as not being able to have challenging and difficult conversations with people. You will still have those, but you'll have it within the boundaries, the psychologically safe boundaries that I talked about earlier on.
Yeah, it's a healthy challenge, isn't it? And again, it's back to
Yes,
that inclusivity that if we are, because we all come with our own individual experiences in life, which
exactly.
makes us think differently from each other. And if we can feel safe to bring a challenge in a healthy way from our own point of view, then you're going to get to the answer quicker.
Exactly. And you're much, and also, this links into diversity of thought through empowerment, because actually, I think that's the way the whole DE and I argument is going. And actually, diversity of thought creates very healthy environments. And how do you get diversity of thought? By empowering people.
All roads lead back to our topic of empowerment. So I think we took the long and winding road there, but I think we got there in the end, Neela.
Indeed, indeed. Really, really good to talk this through with you, Emma.
Yeah, you've sparked a lot of ideas, and we hope we have for all of our listeners as well. So thanks for joining us on our podcast about empowerment today. We've been your virtual coach advantage, and we've loved coaching you today. Join us again for the next episode in season 2. We'd love to hear your feedback, any comments you've got, or even requests for topics. So please do get in touch. You can reach us on our website, which is springboardfuture.com. Follow us on our LinkedIn or Twitter pages. And don't forget to join us for our next podcast. Thanks for joining the Virtual Coach Advantage podcast. We hope to coach you again soon.